I've a humble little motto that is homely though it's true. Keep a plug-in away. It's a thing when I've an object that I always try to do. Keep a plug-in away.
Welcome to the premiere episode of Discovering Dunbar, a podcast presented by the Love of Dunbar Collective. This is our premiere episode, Keep a Plugging Away. We hope to add to your understanding of Mr. Dunbar and help you see him as a man, not just as a writer. Please welcome Eric Johnson and Pamela Poole Starks, reporters from station WLOD.
Good evening. I'm Eric Johnson.
And I am Pamela Poole Starks.
We're reporting for station WLOD, the official station of the Love of Dunbar Collective.
And Eric, I have to say, this may be the most meaningful assignment we have ever had yet.
Absolutely, Pamela, because we're about to enter a national treasure. The home of Paul Laurence Dunbar, the first African American to make a living in the literary arts.
And yet, Eric, what amazes me is how much he's accomplished in such a short life.
Sadly, this is also the place where Mr. Dunbar died at the young age of 33 in 1906 in the arms of his mother.
Is that staggering?
It's staggering. In just about 20 years, Dunbar produced more than 400 poems, 12 books, novels, and short stories.
And somehow found time to become one of the most popular performers of his day.
Exactly. He wasn't just a poet on the page, he was an entertainer on stage.
What struck me was, as we prepared for this assignment, was how wide his world really was.
Yes. His classical education combined with the stories he absorbed from his parents and their friends, many of whom had been enslaved, gave him an extraordinary range.
And that range apparently showed up in his writing.
Dunbar wrote in dialects from Georgia, Kentucky, Indiana, Massachusetts, and even Germany and Ireland.
Which means he was multilingual before it was fashionable.
And influential. His work shaped writers and artists like Zora Neale Hurston, Langston Hughes, and Paul Robeson.
Maya Angelou actually entitled her autobiography, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, from a line in Dunbar's poem, Sympathy.
That alone tells you how far his words traveled.
I heard, in fact, we know he recited his poems in concerts all across America.
Presidents of
He even performed for royalty in England.
What surprised me, Pamela, was learning that Dunbar was also a fighter for civil rights.
Absolutely. He engaged with leaders like Ida B. Wells, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Mary Church Terrell.
And he was a favorite of Frederick Douglass, once called him the most promising young Negro in America.
Dunbar wrote sharp, fearless essays about the conditions of African Americans and the nation's failure to address those injustices.
Which brings us to today.
Because while it is always moving to visit the Dunbar house in which he purchased himself,
today is especially exciting.
We've been invited for tea and biscuits with Mrs. Dunbar herself, Eric.
She and her older son, Robert, invited several people who knew her son. Paul Laurence Dunbar during the early years of his career.
Stories, memories, voices from the past.
So please join us as we step inside this historical home that has been designated as a national treasure.
And into the world of Paul Laurence Dunbar.
Thank you kindly, Eric and Pamela. And welcome to my home. We're gathered here today to remember my son, Paul Laurence Dunbar. Now, you know, I have two sons by my first husband, William Murphy. One of them, Robert, is helping me host this afternoon.
I'm so excited about this afternoon's reception. It's only right that Paul's story be told.
Yes, yes, it is, Robert. But let's tell it true. No man rises alone. Talent helps, but people, it's the people that holds you up. Family matters. And Paul, he had strong family, stood on strong shoulders. His grandmother, his great-grandmother, strong women, sharp minds, mighty clever with their words. They talked their way to freedom and talked their way into owning their own homes right here in Dayton. That's where Paul's foundation began.
And that's a story all of its own.
Yes, yes, it is. And let's get back to Paul's foundation. When emancipation came, I didn't linger. I left Kentucky for Dayton, just 20 years old, carrying you, Robert, and with little William holding my skirts. I was sick, tired, scared half to death. But I had somewhere to go, to my mama, to my grandmama, so I kept moving, and I made it.
And Mother, that took a lot of courage.
Yes, it took necessity. But I knew one thing. I knew, don't stop.
You always told us never to give up, and you taught us that words could be a weapon or a comfort. Paul knew how to use them both ways.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. Now, not long after we got to Dayton, I met Joshua Dunbar.
You know, I remember when you married him on Christmas Eve. That was something. Christmas and a wedding all in one night. Everybody was there. Grandma, great-grand, all the family.
There was some night, wasn't it? Now, Paul, he come later on in that summer. And the moment we saw him, we knew he was different. Now, all my children, all y'all is special to me. You know I love you. But that boy, he had a look that said, I've got work to do. I am determined to do it.
You wanted to name him Joshua, didn't you, Mama?
I surely did. But Joshua Dunbar said, no, Matilda, madam. We'll call him Paul, after the apostle. He'll be great. And we added that Lawrence's middle name after a good neighbor who was always lending a hand.
Paul Laurence Dunbar. Sounds like a man born with purpose.
Purpose and a lesson for the world to keep plugging away. Well, hello, Sister Louise. You look well.
As do you, Sister Matilda.
Robert, now you probably don't know that Sister Louise and I met first at the Echo Street Church where she was teaching Sunday school when Paul's feet barely reached the floor.
Barely reached. and those toes never stayed still. It was like the toes were trying to get to the same place by his daydreaming mind had traveled while he stared out one window in that cold classroom. Paul had a way of leaning forward even when he was sitting down, as though something just beyond us was calling him. One thing that stays in my mind is Paul's fascination with the Bible story of David and Goliath.
Oh, yes, Sister Louise. He loved that story. Yes, he did. And he loved that slingshot part of the story too, didn't he, Robert?
He sure did. His father made it for him. You lost a couple of cups to that slingshot, didn't you, Mother?
I surely did, Robert. Paid for Paul's imagination with my precious china. Now
I,
tell me, why do you think he liked that story so much, Louise?
I think it was because David was small in stature, just like Paul. No one expected David to be anything more than a shepherd, but
Mm,
that didn't stop him. Paul was the same kind of child, determined.
He was that determined from the very start. He just kept plugging away.
He was determined in the best way. At 8 years old, he performed his poem, An Easter Ode, at the Sunday school program. I knew then that he understood the words and rhythm have power to carry emotion.
Hmm. I was so proud of that boy that year. Yes, it was. I've been finding scraps of poems that he had written in the wash and in the trash and in shirts. He'd just throw them in the corner. Every one of them, though, I kept every one of them. But that Easter ode was the first time that he let the world hear what he had to say.
That performance gave him the courage to use poetry to share his fascination with nature and with his classmates. Paul would often perform a one boy show about animals he'd seen in the market or in the woods. The children whooped with glee when he imitated those animals.
He saw some of those animals at the circus with his father. He and Paul spent many a Saturday walking through the woods, observing nature, or sitting quietly on the riverbank. Sometimes, when they came home from an outing, Paul would tell us a story that kept the family laughing. It might be about what Mr. Joshua told the fish after it was caught. Needn't wriggle, Mr. Catfish, 'cause I got you just the same. You been eating, I'll be eating, and we neither ain't to blame. But you needn't feel so lonesome for eyes throwing out to sea if there ain't some of your comrades for you to keep company. He entertained us, imitating Mr. Joshua.
How well I remember, Robert. Mr. Joshua pretended to be upset when Paul imitated him. He couldn't help but laugh.
Paul had a wonderful sense of humor. On one occasion, when I was teaching vocabulary lesson, I said to the class, "Do you want to know how to remember a word to make it your own? All you must do is repeat the word 10 times. Then it belongs to you." From the row of students, I heard Paul say, "Grace, Grace, Grace." He said that name 10 times. Then he said, "Now you belong to me, Grace." All the children laughed, but Paul was serious about his feelings and went on to write a poem about his first love. He called it My Best Gal. Her hair is a brilliant red, and her voice like a bumblebee's hum. And this lovely young damsel is fed on the sweetest of chewing gum. I have met her at church and at fair. How I love her, no person can tell. But the terrible hue of her hair has made me feel weary. Oh well, 'tis the world with its sorrow and care. And I'm not the first love-struck swain to be cursed with a girl with red hair. Then a strong emotion arose, and I knelt on my knees then and there. Dear hearers, I didn't propose, and to say what I said was a sin. For I almost immediately rose. Good heavens! I'd knelt on a pen.
Oh, that boy. He was humorous, all right. And that humor carried him through more dole than sorrow ever could. Is Miss Jennings with us today?
I certainly am. I appreciate the fact that you invited me to join.
You know, Miss Jennings, I'm so glad to finally meet you. Sister Louise here was just telling us about Paul's sense of humor.
Yes, as I was saying, his humor made him popular. But it was that curiosity and determination that made him continue his education at Central High School, becoming the only Negro in the class.
A proud moment for us.
It certainly was. Now that's when you came into his life, ain't it, Miss Jennings?
Yes, it was. By the time Paul entered my class, though, at Central High, he had already made peace with language. Words came easily to him. But in those halls, among all the recitations and the debate, he learned to sharpen them, to persuade, to console, and at times to stir rejoicing. The students called him Deacon. He was not out of mockery, it was respect. He carried himself with authority, and he, beyond his years, when he rose to debate, he did not bluster. He reasoned, and the room listened. I have seen grown men fail under such scrutiny, but Paul did not. No, indeed, he did not. His classmates elected him president more than one time. He was so much with words. They were part of him. Paul's friends numbered words 5, but doing words his nemesis. Let us say that numbers did not always agree with Paul's interpretation.
You know, Miss Jennings, many a night I watched that boy wrestle with those numbers in our damp little kitchen. You're right. Words were his friends, but numbers was his nemesis.
He wanted them earnestly, but they resisted him, and yet he persisted. I have lived long enough to know that perseverance is its own form of genius. During the war, I believed freedom would settle matters once and for all. It did not. But when I watched Paul stand before his classmates, steady, eloquent, unafraid, I thought perhaps the struggle had simply changed shape. And perhaps this young man, with his pen, would carry it further than my generation ever could do. Still, popularity and talent alone are not enough. Sometimes the unexpectedly throws you a curveball, and Paul learned it quickly when the flu kept him out of school for 2 weeks.
Yes, that was the year he nearly didn't graduate. And it wasn't just the flu, Miss Jennings. He worried about me as well because that illness took him away from his job lighting lamps. He was working with his brothers, you know. That meant less money coming into the household. And on top of being worried about me and worried about school, Paul still was carrying his father's death. That was a mighty heavy year, a mighty heavy year.
Oh, Mother, how I remember when Mr. Joshua died. Paul was devastated. He loved his father. But even though he was young, he understood something many never do, that sorrow demands expression.
That's why he wrote that poem for his father, Our Martyred Soldiers. You know, they printed that in the local paper the first time his words was in print. And once those words was in print, there was no turning back for that boy.
Even when times was hard, when money was scarce, when sickness came, Paul never asked, why me? He asked, what now? That's when I knew his path was already laid.
I didn't realize all that was happening. That was quite a year for Paul. When that illness kept him from school, he fell behind with mathematics. The principal told him in no uncertain terms that he would not graduate unless he passed the upcoming algebra tests. Paul was crushed, but repeating the year was not an option for him. Too many people depended on that diploma. So he did what he always did when the road narrowed before him.
He kept going.
Exactly. He leaned on his friend Orville Wright, a genius at math, but not so good in subjects that required writing. Actually, they leaned on each other. Numbers for words, words for numbers. And he passed that test. And during that struggle, Paul put his resolve into verse. Those verses became the poem, Keep a Pluggin' Away, just to remind you and your audience of that poem. I'd like to share a little of it. I have a humble little motto that is homely, though it's true. Keep a plugging away. It's a thing when I have an object that I always try to do. Keep a plugging away. When you've rising storms to quell, when opposing waters swell, keep a plugging away. Perseverance still is king. Time is sure reward will bring. Work and wait on worrying. Keep a plugging away.
Keep a plugging away. That phrase wasn't just poetry to him, it was instruction.
He was still that boy from Sunday school. Only now the giants had names: illness, failure, and death.
Hmm. But the slingshots, they grew short, they grew stronger. And the aim more sure. Now, my son, he did graduate. And when he crossed that stage, he didn't walk it like an ordinary fella.
No, he didn't. He walked across that stage with confidence of a young man loved by his classmates and venerated by his teachers. He was a young man ready to face the world. The lyrics of the graduating song for his class, which he wrote, expressed that confidence and boldness. When I heard those lyrics, I knew that he was marking the endings and preparing for new beginnings.
That was Paul, always moving forward, always finding his way through. And you're right, Miss Jennings, that was only the beginning.
Miss Jennings and Miss Troy, you shared some things about Paul that I even I didn't know. Thank you so much. Mother has prepared some of Paul's favorite dishes, so would you care to join Eric and Pamela in the drawing room for some food and drink?
Thank you. I believe I will.
And I'll join you too.
Allow me to escort you. Mother, I'll be back as soon as I see to our guests.
Now, you make sure our guest is comfortable, Robert, and you just take your time. I'm fine. You know, Miss Jennings, she told the truth when she said talent by itself ain't enough, not for a young colored poet in this world. Hmm. A young man with a high school diploma, more than most in this country, black or white, and the best work he could find was running a elevator.
Up and down and up, carrying everybody but himself.
I must be dreaming. Is that you, Bud Burns?
It is, Mother Matilda.
Even if it's a dream, I'm so glad to hear your voice, Paul's dearest friend.
I looked up to Paul.
And Dayton looked up to both of you, Paul the writer, and you, Dr. William Bud Burns, Dayton's first Negro doctor, with Paul as your first patient.
He was my patient until my death, just 2 weeks before Paul's passing. I was fortunate that my foster family was financially able to send me to college. But Paul.
But Paul did not have that kind of backing, the backing that you had. Your foster parents, white folks with money, they had the means. Now, Paul, he had the talent and the high school diploma. The talent don't pay tuition. So the best work he could find was running an elevator up and down all day long. And when that elevator stood still, though, Paul didn't. He pulled out his paper and he started writing. And if folks would listen, he'd recite those poems right there between the flows.
He never wasted time.
No, he didn't. It was like he knew his time on earth was short. And one day, though, the Lord in his goodness sent a miracle. A teacher from Central High recommended him to the Western Association of Writers. Asked if Paul open their meeting right here in Dayton.
That was no small honor, and Paul knew it.
It surely wasn't. And yes, he was proud and scared. He couldn't ask for a day off. Color boy don't make such requests lightly.
Especially one trying to keep his dreams and his job.
So what did Mr. Keep Plugging Away do? He jumped on that bicycle Orville gave him, pedaled like the devil himself was chasing him, rushed to that meeting, stood up and read his poem, The Old Tunes, and then took off just as fast back to the elevator.
Didn't even stop to wipe the sweat.
Didn't stop for nothing. He left so fast that he never heard what followed. Applause. Applause that sounded like thunder, they said. Folks calling for him to come back. Encores. But Paul, he was already gone. Back to his post. Back to his duty.
That figures. One time everybody claps, he's already on his way to the next floor.
But there was one man in that room who saw it all, heard it all, and said to himself, I must find that young man.
In that moment, Mother Matilda.
That moment, it changed everything.
I believe Miss Matthews is here, Mother.
Oh, it'll be good to see her. It'll be so good to see her. I've been wanting to meet her for a long time. You gonna let her in, Robert?
Yeah, Miss Matthews. Miss Matthews, come on in. Mama
Yes.
waiting for you.
Good afternoon, Mrs. Matthews. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation on behalf of your husband, Dr. James Newton Matthews, a doctor and a poet.
Good afternoon, Mrs. Dunbar. Yes, James was a poet and one of the founders of the Western Writers Association.
You know, I was just sitting here thinking about the day Dr. Matthews heard my Paul at that Western Writers meeting, the day that changed my boy's life.
How well I remember. James came home that evening with Paul's name still on his lips. He was so taken with your son that he sat straight down and wrote an article for the Indianapolis Journal, praising both the young man and his work.
Yes, I remember it. I was just looking at the scrapbook and I came across it. A New Negro Poet, it was called. I remember your husband, he wrote that Paul had the coolness and the dignity of a cultured entertainer. Said he read his poems in tones as musical as Apollo's lute. Now, I didn't rightly know who Apollo was, but I knew it was something fine.
It sounded fancy enough.
Well, that meeting at the Western Writers Association was the start of a true literary friendship and mentorship. James would come home and talk of many things: politics, books he was reading, the condition of his patients. But when he spoke of Paul, his voice softened.
Mm-hmm.
At first, it was admiration for such promise in one so young. Then it became concern. And before long, a sense of responsibility.
You know, Miss Matthews, that article and your husband's steady hand carried my son's name beyond Dayton. Doors that had been shut began to open.
James said Paul possessed something rare, and not just talent, but earnestness. He listened carefully, he revised without complaint, he questioned praise as closely as he weighed criticism.
He didn't just soak it in. He stared it around first.
That's right. That's right.
But James worried.
About his health?
Yes. And about the weight of being placed on him so young. James often said people will want him to stand for more than himself. He feared the world would ask Paul to carry burdens no poem could hold.
You know, I feared that too. A mother always does.
Yeah, and yet James believed Paul would not stop. He once told me Paul does not retreat, he recalibrates.
Sounds like another way of saying what you always told us, Mother.
Keep a plugging away. Yes.
Exactly.
When Paul first spoke to me about Dr. Matthews, what mattered to me most wasn't how clever your husband thought my boy was. I already knew that. What I wanted to know was if he believed that Paul could endure what was coming and would he stand beside him when the road turned hard.
James did believe in Paul, Mrs. Dunbar, with his whole heart.
I believe you, because all my wondering was put to rest when Paul was just 20. You know, I found them poems, or rather, I should say, Paul found them poems that I had saved, all them poems he'd been throwing away, every scrap. When he saw them all together, he decided to publish a book of his poetry.
Publish a book? That sounds bold.
Boy, bold don't half cover it. A young man, a young colored man, no money to his name, talking about publishing poetry. And one look at his black face, and publishers shook their heads. No. But Paul, he was not deterred. He was determined.
I remember that Paul wrote a letter to James about the obstacles. He laid out his plan to overcome them plainly and carefully. And he wrote how he would gather pledges from friends to buy the book before it was even printed. He told James that making a large profit mattered less than paving the way for better things.
That sounds just like my boy.
Yes, and James knew the world would not be kind. But he believed Paul would succeed because he understood that progress is made in inches, not leaps. James once said, that young man has already learned how to keep going without applause.
Yes, applause. But you know, no one makes it alone. Not truly. And your husband, Mrs. Matthews, your husband was the steady hand my son needed right then. Dr. Matthews' belief stirred him, gave him strength to keep plugging away.
How did Paul finally get the book published, Mother?
Well, you know, Paul used to say, stop talking and start to doing. And that's what he did. He started to doing. He gathered pledges, nearly $400 worth from classmates and teachers and church folks and friends. And the last 100, he did what his grandmother and his great grandmother had done with careful words and a smooth tongue. That boy convinced a stranger, a white man no less, to invest. And just like that, the book was at the printers, and all we could do was sit back and wait.
Oh, man. Mother, Paul wrote me that you nearly wore a path to the door waiting on that book to be delivered.
I surely did. I did. But you know, before long, copies of Oak and Ivy came right to my door, and there I stood, Matilda Dunbar, mother of a published poet.
And in that first book, Paul included a tribute to my husband. A simple title, to Dr. James Newton Matthews. All around about, the clouds encompassed me, and hope, which I had thought to hold so tight, slipped from my weakening grasp and floated free. But when I thought to flee the unequal strife, fate gave the choicest gem of all her store. And noble Matthews came into my life. He warmed my being like a virile flame, and with his coming, light and courage came.
You know, I love that last line. And with his coming, light and courage came. Paul's words always rang true. I want to thank you, Mrs. Matthews, for coming today. Without your husband's encouragement and his support, my son's road might have been very different.
Miss Matthews, we invite you to join the others in the drawing room for some refreshments.
Thank you, Robert. I believe I will.
You know, Robert, while Paul was finding his way, you was finding yours too. When you moved to Chicago, I was mighty sad. I missed you and your family every day.
I missed you too, Mother dear. But there was more work for plasterers like me in Chicago, and the pay was better. Almost right away, I tried to get you and Paul to come along, but you didn't take to the idea.
Chicago too big for me. And we was doing just fine in Dayton.
Well, your letters told the whole story. Paul was making a name for himself, recitals here and there. He'd even written and published his own book, Oak and Ivy, and sold 500 copies. I knew my little brother was going places. I still remember the letter you sent me when those books arrived from the printer. You know, I laughed with pride when you told me what you said to the delivery man when he asked, "Who is this Dunbar anyway? A lawyer, a preacher?" You told him with pride, "Paul, my Paul's an elevator boy, and a poet." When I read that letter, I knew Paul needed to be in Chicago, especially with the Columbian Exposition coming in 1893. The whole world was gathering there. I figured he'd find work and opportunities. So I sent another letter asking him to come for the summer just to see the wonders of the expo.
You know, Robert, that decision weighed very heavy on that boy. He talked it over with Dr. Matthews, who urged him to go, saying, "New ground often gives a young man new sight."
Well, I didn't know that. But I do know that Paul quit his elevator job, bought a ticket, and came to Chicago. First, he didn't care too much for it. It was too noisy. Too many people going every which way. Folks of every color and nation crowded in the streets. It set his head spinning. But Paul had a purpose. He'd say, "I'm here to make money and connections."
You know, something shifted in him there. I saw it for myself when I later came to Chicago.
Yes. He began to see the world and his place in it more clearly, but he never forgot where he came from.
Yes, you know, he carried us all with him, our stories, our voices, and it kept moving, not because the road was easy, but because stopping was never his way.
Mother, this is what happened, just like in Dayton.
Mhm.
Paul searched until he found a job as a waiter in a downtown hotel. And you know, when the waiters were not waiting on tables, They gathered by the swinging kitchen door, and they talked about their girlfriends. Waiters passing through with loaded trays called out, "Jump back!" If the idle waiters didn't move fast enough, the warning came again. "Jump back, honey, jump back." The scene appealed to Paul. And you know what he did? He wrote a poem that caught the banter and the rhythm of those waiters. He came home one evening and shared it with the wife and me. He called it a Negro love song. Let me share it with our guests. Seen my lady home last night. Jump back, honey, jump back. Held her hand and squeezed it tight. Jump back, honey, jump back. I heard her sigh, a little sigh. I seen a light gleam from her eye and a smile go flitting by. Jump back, honey, jump back. I heard the wind blow through the pine. Jump back, honey, jump back. Mockingbird was singing fine. Jump back, honey, jump back. And my heart was beating so when I reached my lady's door that I couldn't bear to go. Jump back, honey, jump back. I put my arm around her waist. Jump back, honey, jump back. I raised her lips and I took a taste. Jump back, honey, jump back. Love me, honey. Love me true. Love me well as I love you. And she answered, "'Cause I do." Jump back, honey, jump back. Oh, my goodness.
Oh, my goodness, that boy sure had a way with words. He caught how we spoke, just plain and honest, like, just how we speak.
Most folks would agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't know is how shy Paul really was. I was always amazed at how my quiet little brother turned into someone so funny and at ease once he began to recite his poetry.
Now, charming too. Don't forget that part.
How can I? Handsome he was, with ebony skin and hair brushed nice with a part in place.
Mm-hmm.
Still, it shouldn't have surprised me when he wrote to say he met a well-known violinist, Joseph Douglas, Frederick Douglass's grandson, no less.
Mm-hmm. That must have been mighty exciting for that boy.
Yes, indeed, Mother. Paul was beside himself when Joseph introduced him to Mr. Douglas, who had an important position at the World's Exposition.
That was a door opening wide.
Paul never said it straight to me, but I believe meeting Mr. Douglas and so many others fighting for our people opened his eyes to the condition of the Negro in this country. You can see it in his writings afterwards, poems like The Haunted Oak and his essays regarding his experience traveling in Jim Crow cars.
Yes. His words, they grew heavier, stronger.
I think he found another way to live by his own rule to keep plugging away.
Robert, when you think about it, we know Chicago did not make your brother a poet. He was already that. However, it did provide him with a clearer picture of the world that he was riding into. Mm-hmm. Can that be at the door? Come in. Why is Rebekah? It does my heart good to see you again. It's been a while. Thank you for coming to share what you remember of Paul.
Thank you for inviting me, Mrs. Dunbar and Robert. It's good to see you again.
Robert, I'm going to go to the drawing room to check on our other guests. I'll return rightly.
Okay, Mother dear. Rebekah, you met Paul at the World's Exposition. That was the time when his name was spreading faster than he could keep up with it.
That's right, Robert. I met him in Chicago. That's where I met him. And, you know, I already knew of him because he was a rising poet. And we spoke about him and his poem all over the Washington Literary Circle. Folks talked about how that standing ovation that he got in Dayton, we heard that. And then and my friends, we were already reading Oak and Ivy. We just loved that book. And we just just talked about him all the time. But you know what? Meeting him in person, now that was something altogether. Though he was small in stature, Paul carried himself with a presence.
Small in body, full of promise.
That's right, Robert. You put it together so well. You know, when he first arrived at the fair, he seemed a little shy, nearly overwhelmed by the noise, the crowds, all those people from every corner of the world. It was something to see.
Coming from Dayton, as you know, Rebekah, a town of 60,000, to Chicago, a city of over 1 million, is a big step.
That's a big step. But once he found his footing, Paul came alive. He was sharp eyed, curious, and so funny. Oh, we spent hours walking all over the fairground, talking, debating, observing. We visit the pavilions like the Spanish town and the Turkish village and the streets of Paris. We were taking it all in, showing the beauty that they wanted us to see. But we also saw what they were trying to hide too. In the evenings, we went to the dance hall where Joseph Douglas and his friends played their violin, that ragtime song, that music that Scott Joplin was playing. It was everywhere. And it was so much fun and so exciting. The energy was just beautiful.
Sounds like Paul couldn't stand still even if he wanted to.
No way. That is fair to say. His love of words showed up in his life. He noticed everything, Robert. He observed those goers. He was quick and clever and precise. He kept us laughing, talking, pointing out things that none of us would actually see. But Paul saw it and he pointed out. It was so much fun. But you know, he was troubled as well. Negroes were shut out of the exposition as far as anything meaningful. So much time so we put our time at the World Congress Auxiliary. That's where we spend most of our time. There we had Negro speakers, men and women. They talked about medicine, education, moral life, and social reform. Those speeches held our attention. And afterwards, Paul and I would talk late into the night. We talked about what we were witnessing, the conditions of our people. It lay right there in front of us.
You know, Paul told me about the African village.
Yes, we were appalled at that so-called the Dahomian village. Grass huts and half-clad Africans displayed as a spectacle. Robert, they offered as a crude amusement. And we were so disturbed when they introduced that Aunt Jemima. Ugh, it was so degrading the way they presented her. Paul spoke often about responsibility. He believed us people who are educated, we carry the obligation that those who have been learned must share what we learn with our people to advance us all. He began to ask more difficult, haunting questions after that.
And that exposition gave him plenty of reason to ask him, Rebekah. I think our reporters have a short video that will show our audience some of Paul's reasons for asking those hard questions. And while they are watching, you and I can join the others in the drawing room. I just know Mother's sipping on her lasses and water.
I'm sure she is. And I sure hope some of those famous compounds she makes are still there. I love that. Thank you.
Sure enough.
Pamela, we have a video about the Columbian World Expedition to share with our audience.
Yes, Eric. It's short but very informative.
She was a courageous reporter whose exposure of the horrors of lynching in Jim Crow America laid the foundation for the use of investigative journalism to fight back. He was the most influential figure in the abolitionist movement. He used the new medium of photography to take control of his image and combat the racist caricatures widely employed to justify slavery and Jim Crow. Along the way, he became the most photographed American in the 19th century. Ida B. Wells and Frederick Douglass. In 1893, the two joined forces at one of the largest World's Fairs held to that time, the dazzling World's Columbian Exposition. The 1893 Chicago World's Fair marked the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus's voyage to the Americas. Exhibits from across the country and around the world found a home in Chicago, Illinois for the event.
This was an opportunity for the United States to showcase its progress as a modern nation on the world's stage, to prove that it was not just on par with Europe, but in some ways had surpassed it.
Black Americans hoped that the World's Fair would offer them an opportunity to display their remarkable achievements in the 30 years since the Emancipation Proclamation. But when the organizers refused to give them a dedicated exhibition space, Ida B. Wells and Frederick Douglass sprang into action, publishing a pamphlet called The Reason Why the Colored American is Not in the World's Columbian Exposition. Written primarily by Wells with an introduction by Douglass, the pamphlet was distributed to highlight African American achievements and attack the ways Southern white Americans were subjugating Black citizens.
In the 13th Amendment, which ends the institution of slavery, there is a loophole for convicts who have been convicted of a crime. White Southerners very quickly implemented a system where they could force Black people who were convicted of crimes back into servitude. And Ida B. Wells used this huge platform, her and Frederick Douglass, to bring this to a national audience.
After many Black people lobbied for a long time, they ultimately got some form of representation at the World's Fair, which was a Negro Day.
With free watermelon stands and racist exhibits displaying Africans as examples of mankind's primitive past. The infamous Negro Day exemplified the racism that Douglass and Wells were protesting. Ironically, Douglass was asked to be the primary speaker on Negro Day. He saw it as an opportunity to make the case against Jim Crow racism, despite objections from his family and from Wells herself. In a searing indictment of racism in his country, Douglass ended his powerful speech with a plea to the American people to have, quote, loyalty enough, honor enough, and patriotism enough to live up to their own Constitution.
Pamela and Eric, while your audience watched the video, two more guests have arrived, Ms. Ida B. Wells and Mr. Frederick Douglass. I'm so glad that you're here. Thank you for coming to honor my son and for all that you and Miss Wells have done for our people. Welcome to my home.
It is my pleasure.
As it is mine, my dear lady.
Mr. Douglass, My son idolized you. When you called him one of your boys, oh my. He was short, but he stood a little taller that day. Why did you call him that?
Well, I called him that because I saw in him fire and discipline. Now, Paul understood that art carries duty. When he stood to recite, he was not entertaining. He was asserting dignity. And many left that expo changed by the sound of his voice.
You know, Mr. Douglas, Paul admired the way you handled that controversy over your participation in the expo.
Yes, many believed I should have boycotted it, but as Miss Wells, simply the same as Miss Wells, and they had reason. Our people were largely excluded. No black commissioner, few positions of consequence. I attended not as a representative of Negro America, but as the commissioner for Haiti. It was not a Negro pavilion, but it gave me a platform to protest injustice.
So tell me, Mr. Douglas, how did you come to meet Paul?
Well, I had followed your son in the papers for some time now. His poems, his essays. One evening, my grandson, Joseph Douglas, the great violinist, brought him to me, and I greeted him and said, Paul, I have known of you. You are one of the boys. And I asked him to read one of his poems. Then I recited one of his poems back to him.
Which one was that, Mr. Douglas?
Well, Mrs. Douglas, that was his poem that was titled The Old Tunes, the one that had garnered him a standing ovation at the Western Writers' Conference earlier. Let me share a bit of it with you, if you do not mind.
Please.
You can talk about your anthems and your arias and such, and your modern choir singing that you think so awful rich. But you ought to heed us youngsters in the times not far away, us singing old tunes in the old-fashioned way. Yes, Paul was a poet indeed, and I was so impressed by him, his demeanor and his way with words. At that, I hired him as my clerk at the pavilion. His time as a waiter was over, and I paid him $5 a week from my own pocket. That was quite a bit of money for a young man in 1893.
Yes, it was. You know, Mr. Douglas, you might not know that that money, that job allowed for him to send for me to join him in Chicago. And for that, I thank you. I thank you. So tell me, what was his duties as your clerk?
Well, he managed my schedule, edited my speeches, and wrote articles, assisted Negro speakers such as Miss Wells, who was among them. He also recited his own works, The Martyred Soldiers, An Ode to Ethiopia. Each time he was well received. And you know his voice carried, it was very strong. And people listened.
Yes, his voice carried. That boy had quite the voice. Now, he told me that he had recited the martyred soldiers, on the same stage as you, Mr. Douglas, on Negro Day. But tell me, when did he recite Ode to Ethiopia?
Perhaps I can answer that question. It was at the Women's Auxiliary, the only pavilion that allowed Negro speakers. That lack of Negro representation was the reason I had decided to boycott it until I received an invitation from you, Mr. Douglas.
Yes, I needed you and others to stand with me in our fight for real freedom in this country for all people.
Well, I'm glad I accepted. But as I was saying, Paul recited that poem at the Women's Auxiliary Pavilion, and he chose it carefully. He said Ethiopia stood for something larger than a nation or even a continent. It stood for Negro endurance, Negro sovereignty, Negro worth. At an expo that barely acknowledged us, he wanted to remind the world that we had a history before bondage and a destiny beyond it. Here's an excerpt from that beautiful poem. O Mother Race, to thee I bring this pledge of faith unwavering, this tribute to thy glory. I know the pangs which thou didst feel when slavery crushed thee with its heel, with thy dear blood all gory. Be proud, my race, in mind and soul. Thy name is writ on glory's scroll in characters of fire. Go on and up. Our souls and eyes shall follow thy continuous rise. Our ears shall list to thy story from bards who from thy root shall spring, and the proud tune they always to sing of Ethiopia's glory.
Whew, that was my son. He saw what was happening around him. He saw the insult, but he also saw opportunity.
Yes, he understood something many did not. Progress sometimes comes through unlikely hands.
Well, Mr. Douglas, you and I have lived long enough to know that the Lord can use anybody, even folks who never meant to open the door.
And when that door opened, Paul did not hesitate. He stepped through, not as someone begging entry, but as a man who knew he belonged. He stood between worlds, and he refused to let either of them define him.
That is when I knew he had crossed a threshold.
Yes, he did. And Miss Wells, I will never forget what you wrote after meeting him. You said in an article, Paul Dunbar is in all particulars most interesting. He has undoubtedly a great future. That was a generous word, Miss Wells, a generous word. And Paul, he treasured that article. But you know, praise on paper, it don't always travel home with you. When he came back to Dayton in the fall of '93, his heart was full from Chicago. He left that expo on fire. But home, home cooled him. The welcome he expected never came. There was praise, but little support, warm words, but little money, and fewer doors than before for a young colored poet trying to live by his pen. But what might have burned another man to ash only deepened the heat in Paul, stoked the fire. He stood, but he stood heavy. No applause, only silence. And what Dr. Matthews once said, that that young man has already learned to keep going without applause was proven true. Was proven true. Now, Mr. Douglas, did you stay in touch with Paul after the exposition?
Well, sadly, no. Though I invited him to my home and we did correspond, I never saw the young man again. But I remember him clearly, an intelligent, articulate black man working beside me at the fair. He met every obstacle the same way, not retreating, but by pressing forward. You can say he just simply kept plugging away.
Yes, I'm so glad that the both of you come to see me today and to share your memories of Paul.
Miss Wells, Mr. Douglas, we have a fresh pot of hot tea, and Mrs. Dunbar's famous compounds just came out the oven. Would you like to join the others and have some yourself or take?
That sounds delicious.
Yes, it does. And I hear, Mrs. Dunbar, that your corn pone is so delightful. Mrs. Dunbar, that Paul wrote a poem about it, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, he did. And what a compliment that you remember that poem. What a compliment. Well, please enjoy. Robert is out there in the drawing room. He'll see to your every need. Rebekah, will you stay for me, please?
Oh, sure, ma'am. I'd love to stay with talk to you.
And you know, I was thinking you stayed in touch with Paul, didn't you, after the expo?
Oh, yes, ma'am. Mostly through letters. And through those letters, I came to know my friend more deeply than I did in person.
Yes, his letters was something special. He didn't hold back. He laid his heart bare.
Yes, he did. I know he dreamed of going to college. And when Clark University awarded him an honorary master's degree, it stirred up that hope again. But hope does not pay tuitions. The door quietly closed, one by one. Even with all his talent, even with his training, he was denied a teaching post at a colored high school in Washington. Even Mr. Douglas's recommendation could not move the board. He wrote about it gently, but I know it wounded him severely.
Yes. I could feel it. I could feel it. I could feel it and I could hear it in his spirit when he wrote that poem, We Wear the Mask.
I agree.
We wear the mask that grins and lies. It hides our cheeks and shades our eyes. This debt we pay to human guile, with torn and bleeding hearts, we smile. We wear the mask.
Yes, he wore the mask at times. And behind it, he wrote of the strain of earning a living by the pen, of praise without support, of being celebrated but not sustained. The sharpest hurt, it came from his own people. Those who admired him publicly but gave little privately. So he had to turn to his white patrons. He accepted their help, but it was never easy. Mrs. Dunbar, I tried to steady him in my replies. that this was a season. It was short, but when the melancholy lingered, it dimmed the bright wit that the world loved about him.
Yes. It's so hard to keep your head up when the weight comes from all sides.
Yeah, you're right. And that season, though it was brief, it left a mark on him. One of his poems spoke of it plainly. The quiet ache, the quiet ache of wanting to be heard by one's own people without being answered. It was that poem worn out. I could hear it in there. You bid me to hold my peace and to dry my fruitless tears, forgetting that I bear the pain beyond my years. You say that I should smile and dry the gloom away, but I would, but sun and smiles have left my life dark days. I used to, at first, to hope, but hope has passed and gone. And now, without a ray, my cheerless life drags on. So sadly goes my heart, unclothed with hope and peace. They ask not for joy again, but only seek release. So
that sorrow did not stop him, but it strengthened his voice. And a stronger voice does not rise alone. Rebekah, I'm so grateful that your voice was one of those that stayed with him and kept him rising.
Yes, I am grateful that I could stay. And I will always remember my friend as the man who kept going through race, through poverty, and through illness. Even when the road got narrower and the light grew dim, Paul kept on plugging away. Yes, he did. Mrs. Dunbar, I believe I heard another guest entering. If you don't mind, I think I'll join the others in the drawing room.
I don't mind, Rebekah. Thank you so much. And you know, everything Paul told me about you is true. You is a good friend, a real good friend.
Thank you, ma'am.
I wonder who it was at the door. Alice. Alice, how good it is to see you.
Oh, thank you, Mother Matilda. The pleasure's all mine.
You know, many voices spoke to Paul, but there was only one that his heart listened for, yours, Alice Ruth Moe.
Oh, you're so kind. Oh, thank you. Well, many voices spoke to Paul, many. But I wasn't the only one. Oh, my heart also listened to his heart.
But now, you and Paul, you met first on the page, is that right?
Yes, we did. Before we ever met, we knew one another through our poetry and short stories. At 19, my essays and poetry was also published. So in 1895, while Paul was serving as acting editor of the Indianapolis World, he read one of my poems, If I Had Known, and he wrote a letter to me.
I can only imagine how meeting you pleased him. To discover a young woman who could match him line for line. Now, what did it say in that first letter?
Oh, he wrote, I am drawn to you, he wrote, because we are working along the same lines and because of the sketch of you that appeared in the paper. But I suspect he was drawn mainly to the sketch.
You think so?
Well, he said he admired my work as a poet and as a voice for women's issues. The sketch merely gave him courage to reach out to me.
That do sound like Paul, bold with the pen, cautious with himself.
Very cautious. When I asked him to send his photograph, he refused. He wrote, "Women so love beauty, and I have nothing to offer them." He feared I might lose interest in him.
Oh, that child, that child.
Yet in the very same letter, Mother Dunbar, he asked for my photograph.
Of course he did.
Well, photographs were costly, so I sent him my book, Violets and Other Tales, instead. He replied that he would publish my poems, but only if I sent photographs to feature with the poems. He would not give up, I'm telling you. Oh, finally, I borrowed my mother's photograph of me and sent it with strict instructions for him to return it to me. Months later, he returned it with a request for another photograph. This time I sent him my only other photograph. And as you know, Mother Matilda, and I also heard that he kept it until his death.
He did. He did. It was 2 years, though, before the two of you met in person, wasn't it?
Yes, 2 years too long.
Were there any storms in those years?
Oh, distance almost stirred up a few. One time I discovered that Paul was still writing to his admirers.
Oh.
Yes. At first, I did not care for it, but later I learned something curious. His letters to them often spoke of his affection for me.
Oh, that sounds like my boy. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and soon his letters began, "Dear wifey to be." At first, I answered him politely, kindly, but I did not encourage him.
And that discouraged him not at all.
Not in the least. He kept writing. He said I was his muse, a love he could not help but write about. His first poem to me was titled Alice. May I share a verse with you?
Yes, yes.
Know you winds that blow your course down verdant valleys, that somewhere you must perforce kiss the brow of Alice. With her gentle face you find, kiss it softly, naughty wind.
I know you just gave us an excerpt, but that sounds like a lovely poem. He clearly was smitten by you. But now tell me, Alice, how did your family receive my son?
Oh, not warmly. My mother believed Paul was not of the complexion to be my husband, but I cared little about his complexion. His letters spoke to my mind, my heart, my soul, and I adored him. When he wrote that he was sailing to London to perform before royalty, I felt both pride, for his career was very promising, and fear that I would never see him again, or worse, he would forget me. At the same time, I was teaching in New York City at a school directed by Mrs. Victoria Matthews. She gave Paul a bon voyage party before his departure. Knowing of our friendship, she invited me. It was my first chance to see him face to face. My mother urged me not to go, but my heart said go. So with the help of friends, I went. When we were introduced, we fell into each other's arms right in front of everyone. That very night, he proposed, and I accepted. It was nearly a year of letter writing before I ever saw him again.
And by then, my Paul was becoming known far beyond Dayton. Chicago had stretched him. London would shape him. But wherever his name traveled, his heart, it was always with you, Alice. Always with you. I'm so glad that you came today. Because while the world was discovering Paul the poet, he was discovering you. Paul admired beauty, but he believed that beauty became powerful when joined with intellect. That's what he saw in you. And he believed in your gift as surely as he believed in his own.
Oh, thank you, Mother Matilda. I believed in his persistence, his gift of words that live on in so many of our lives even today. Mother Matilda, as you know, your son, Paul, was the love of my life. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad you could come. And I just want to say that Paul's father, Joshua, he prophesied Paul's greatness, and I did everything that I could to help him achieve that greatness. But Paul, he did the work. The world was opening up before him, across oceans, across languages, across borders. And what happened next? Well, that's a story still unfolding. That's a story still unfolding. Maybe the others will join us from the parlor, join us in the parlor from the drawing room. I know they've been back there sipping on my molasses and water and eating my cone pone, but hopefully they're satisfied enough they can join us again.
Oh, Mother, like you and his father and his grandmother and his great-grandmother, and me for that matter, my little brother, Paul, he never gave up on his dreams.
Sometimes fire scorched his dreams, but he never gave up.
Sometimes doors were shut in his face, but he never gave up.
And I do believe that Paul is sitting on the right hand of God, experiencing spiritual peace, love, blessings, and prosperity.
Thank you for saying that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You know, that's something for everybody to remember. What Paul knew. Don't give up on your dreams. Just keep a plugging away.
He had resiliency.
What we have heard tonight is not a recital of achievements, but a portrait of persistence.
Family, activists, love, teachers, each have borne witness to a man shaped not by ease, but by resolve.
Paul Laurence Dunbar's words still move us because they were lived before they were written.
Paul was a student of life, and his words are immortal, applying to all who exist.
Thank you for joining us for Keep Plugging Away. Thank you.
I've a humble little motto that is homely though it's true. Keep a plugging away. It's a thing when I've an object that I always try to do. Keep a plugging away. When you've rising storms to quell, when opposing waters swell, it will never fail to tell. Keep a plugging away. If the hills are high before and the paths are hard to climb, keep a plugging away. And remember that successes come to him who bides his time. Keep a plugging away. From the greatest to the least, none are from this rule released. Be thou toiler, poet, or priest, keep a plugging away. Delve away beneath the surface, there is treasure farther down. Keep a plugging away. Let the rain come down in torrents, let the threatening heavens frown. Keep a plugging away. When the clouds have rolled away, there will come a brighter day. All your labor to repay. Keep a plugging away. There'll be lots of sneers to swallow. There'll be lots of pain to bear. Keep a plugging away. If you've got your eye on heaven, some bright day you'll wake up there. Hey, keep a plugging away. Perseverance still is king. Time is sure reward will bring. Work and wait unwearying. Keep a plugging away. Away. Perseverance still is king. Time is sure reward will bring. Work and wait unwearying. Keep a plugging away.
Thank you for joining us for our performance.